Right, all you glorious gamers out there, welcome to the PlayersToo podcast, the video game podcast for gamers like you, by gamers like you. You can find PlayersToo on all the social media, that's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com, that's PlayerStoo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, it really helps us out. And while you're over there, if you could leave us a little review as well, again, it just helps us out so much. It does a huge amount for the exposure of the show, and thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. You're an absolute legend to us. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, on with the show. My name is Mark Henderson. With me, as always, Mr. Lewis Camley. How's it going, Lewis?
Going not bad at all, Mark. Yep, still here in lockdown cupboard, lockdown HQ. A little bit of a tech
maybe not
disaster.
For much longer, though.
Maybe not. Yeah, things across Britain generally are easing, but Scotland's still a little bit slower, so we might have a few more weeks of this, but maybe not too much longer. Until the second wave comes, of course.
Don't jinx it, Liz. Don't jinx it.
But yeah, I've had a bit of a funny week where my mixer exploded effectively, so it's a bit of a change of setup this time. Hopefully I'm coming through nice and clear. But yeah, how are you doing?
I am doing absolutely fine. You're sounding great these days, Liz. I actually think that you've somehow improved by blowing up your mixer. Anyway, man, what have you been playing this week?
Well, Mark, I have completed both The Last of Us Part 1 and The Last of Us Left Behind,
Nice.
Both key components to my march towards getting ready to play the second part, more or less, at launch, which I've also been playing.
So to be clear, you've completed The Last of Us Part 1, you've completed Left Behind as well, the DLC, and now you've started Part 2, all within a week.
This has been crazy, week to 10 days of Last of Us content. So
that is a lot, man. That is a lot. I mean, emotionally, that is a lot.
I'm feeling a little fragile. But yeah, basically, as I mentioned before, I have been trying to finally complete the original Last of Us, which I started on PS3 and never got very far through, it turns out. Yeah, when we recorded last week, I'd kind of surpassed my original progress. So basically spent the past 7 days absolutely killing that first game, which was just an absolutely incredible experience, I've got to say. I think because I dropped off that when I did, in my head that game has never quite been as good as people talk about it as being, but that is totally wrong. Like, that is an absolutely phenomenal video game, an incredible story full of really tight, action-packed, tense sequences. Just the further you go on, I mean, nothing changes very much in the game, and I don't actually think gameplay-wise a lot has changed as it's gone forward into the second part, which we'll come on to.
No, it's not. Well, yeah, we will come on to that, but
it's very similar. Even though it's kind of the same idea all the way through, it just, you never find yourself not at the edge of your seat. And it is one of those games where, having done like a 4-hour session, I switched it off and started watching a film or whatever, and just suddenly realised how tense and how taut I had been, how sore my shoulders were from being tensed up getting through the final few sequences. It's just staggering. A really incredible achievement for a game that came out 7 years ago and has led us to now, like, to this sequel, which is just unbelievable.
Well, I have now started playing The Last of Us Part 2 as well. I'm probably a wee bit further ahead than you, I would say. My reaction to it immediately is that the gameplay itself is very familiar indeed. However, they have added nice things. Like, for example, there's now a dodge mechanic whereby if one of the zombies, one of the runners, as they're called, the fast-moving ones, runs at you and tries to grab you or attack you in any way, you can dodge before attacking them with melee attacks. This is a good way to deal with the melee combat because it's something that you want to do often against this type of enemy to conserve your ammo. But also it makes it feel more actiony, which is great, which I think might have been slightly missing from the first game. Not that there was anything wrong with that. Also, I found that the human AI, which I know that you won't have come up against, Lewis, yet, is really acting quite clever, I would say. Like, they actively seem to be flanking you, and if you move your position, then they will move their position to correspond and get a better angle on you, or to try and come at you from both sides. And I found that quite good, because the first time that I came up against enemies like that, I actually found myself under quite a lot of pressure, just because I sort of wasn't expecting that. I was sort of expecting to be able to hold back and play like I would normally play in most other video games, e.g. wait for the AI to do something stupid and shoot them in the head. But that didn't really happen. They were all acting quite clever, and when I was trying to just wait for someone to pop up out of cover, they just wouldn't, and someone else would pop up and they would run around and flank me, or they'd be coming at me from the side and I wouldn't see them. I thought that the AI, in that particular instance anyway, was really, really impressive. In terms of some of the other things that have been said about this game, it's very, very violent. I don't think that there's too much argument to be had either way there. Like, it is an extremely violent game. It is going for brutal graphic violence. And if that puts you off playing the game, that is a completely justified decision, I would say, because it is very, very violent. I mean, I don't know how you feel about that.
I would agree with that. It's extremely visceral. Like, obviously, any human-on-human violence is difficult to watch generally. Even the violence against the infected, it still feels fraught and frightening and scary. And so, yeah, I totally agree. I don't think it's overdoing it, certainly where I'm up to yet. And there have been some exceptionally violent and some exceptionally graphic moments up to the point that I've played to. But I don't think at the moment there's anything that I don't feel like I've seen a little bit of before in video games. But yeah, absolutely, if you're squeamish about violence, if you've got any issues around that, it's definitely one to avoid for that sake.
To me, it's not obscene. It's not obscene to me. It is violent. Like, there's absolutely no arguing that as far as I'm concerned. There's no arguing that this is an incredibly violent video game. But to me, it's not obscene. It's not gratuitous.
No, it fits within the world. That's
certainly not how I feel about it. It fits within the world. Thank you. Yeah, it fits within the context of the game. Which kind of brings me on to my next point about this, is that on the internet, what we will say as both sides of the fence, people seem to be absolutely falling over themselves to say something negative about this game. I don't really get it. I don't know if it is just everyone's saying it's good, so I'll be contrarian and I'll tear it down. For a kick-off, if you're one of these people who are saying that this is pushing some SJW agenda, one, you're a fucking moron, and two, you've lost the argument by default. But the fact that gay people are in this game is not pushing any sort of agenda, and if you think that way, you really have to reevaluate why that is, because that is nonsense. As we were discussing off-air, in Left Behind, like, it's made very clear that Ellie is gay. Like, that was well known beforehand. We all knew that, or I thought we all did, before going into this game. So I don't really understand why the mere presence of a gay character is pushing some sort of agenda, because if it was meant to push some sort of agenda, it is failing fucking miserably. Like, they are pushing nothing at all. It's crazy how little they are pushing, considering the main protagonist is gay, and her beginning a same-sex relationship is a relatively big part of what's happening in the early parts of the story. But it doesn't feel as if it's in any way thrown in your face. And I don't really understand why anyone would think that, you know?
No, I mean, it does feel like one of these things people just want to criticise or complain about, particularly if you are of the mindset that there is some agenda behind these things. I think there's much more interesting things going on in the game around criticism of the culture of violence, or some of the culture of video games themselves, and the way that they're generally approached, or how they're seen. And I think if we ever have a spoilery chat about this game, we could dive into that to some extent.
Yeah, I think that having a spoilery chat about this game would probably be quite good, because there is quite a lot of, there's layers upon layers of this as well.
Totally,
because the other point of this is kind of what you were just getting at just now, is the other people who are also falling over themselves to say something negative about this game is the largely liberal game media. It seems to be absolutely falling over themselves to say something negative. Like, the most recent thing that I read was a Wired article saying that, The Last of Us Part 2 tries to be deep and profound and fails, and that was like the headline. Well, I disagree with that headline for many reasons. I also don't think that the game is trying to be particularly profound. Just some other examples are that it's just a murder spree. It's just a complete,
like, misery porn is the phrase I keep hearing.
Misery fest, exactly, which is okay. Like, I don't think that a game has to be fun to say something, or to be valid, certainly. And I think that kind of reducing it down to these arguments of it's just a girl in a murder spree dealing with some overdue teen angst or whatever, or it's just all about violence, it's all about like shock factor, or it's just trying to make you sad and depressed, is to trivialise it to the point of nonsense, quite frankly. A good example of this, I think, is to say like that Breaking Bad is about a drug dealer, or to say that The Sopranos is about a mafia boss. And while those statements are true, it is a very surface level analysis of what those things actually are. And more the point is that I think that these people absolutely fallen over themselves to write something bad about this. Even before they got their hands on this game, a lot of these people seem to be gasping to write something bad. I think that a lot of these people had written in their head a bad article about The Last of Us Part 2 before anybody got their hands on it. And I really think that that's a bit sad, because in my eyes anyway, and only having played about a third of the game, and I'm perfectly willing to change my opinion on any of this if any of this changes as I continue my playthrough of the game, but it seems to me that people are really depriving themselves of what is an astonishing video game.
I think that's totally right, to be honest, Mark. Like, you've seen it with this, and you see it with other media products outside of gaming as well as inside gaming, that certain things, it feels like people want to dislike it. Like you said at the beginning, there's a contrarianness about it. So even if they think it's good, they will find something to say is negative about it. And that's totally fine. I mean, if that's a genuine criticism, and I'm sure there'll be moments playing through the rest of it where the violence and the misery might become overwhelming, and you might pause and think, is this really all that fun or enjoyable or whatever? But certainly from what I've experienced of it, and all of those things are kind of present in the original game, I don't think that criticism holds, basically. I think that there's something very deep and interesting, sure, violent, but really good behind all of that.
I completely agree. I think that there is absolutely nothing wrong with writing a negative review about this video game, to be clear. And I'm not saying, even in the short time that I've played it, that this game is without fault. And maybe if we go into a spoiler cast, we can maybe talk about some of that stuff a bit more. But I'm very conscious that this game is exceptionally story heavy, and I would hate to spoil it for anyone.
Yeah,
I'm
totally.
kind of like steering away from almost talking about the game itself and kind of talking about what the discourse has been around the game, I suppose. And I'm sure that we'll talk about this in weeks to come as well, because, I mean, we'll probably be playing this for a good couple of weeks anyway, I would have thought. But I think that the contrarian response to something very good is a very internet age thing.
Definitely.
I don't get it. I really don't get it. Because I really think that you're denying yourself something that could be pretty special. And Lewis, on that total bummer of a note, let's go on to the news. Alright, news item number 1. EA Live has happened, Lewis. This was basically EA's E3.
Yep.
This is what they would have been doing at E3 had it went ahead. And we got a couple of nice announcements here and there. They opened the show with Apex Legends, announcing that there would be a new event called Lost Treasure that would be bringing a whole host of new cool stuff that's coming out on June the 23rd. But probably the bigger announcement is that it will be coming to Steam and Switch, which is great news for me because I might get back into it a wee bit if it comes to Switch, and if I ever get outdoors again and can play it on a bus. The other part of the announcement that was quite a big deal was crossplay throughout this presentation as well. EA have stressed that a lot of their games are going to be crossplay at launch, or that they will be now making them crossplay, which just makes me think this dam is now fully burst.
Totally, yeah,
you know what I mean? Completely
yeah.
burst. And if a publisher wants to make a game crossplay, the game will be crossplay, and that's that.
And about time too, really. I mean, like you say, the dam has burst. So many games are going to make this possible now.
Absolutely. And in terms of other EA games coming back to Steam, I suppose EA went through a process of taking a lot of their games off Steam, or certainly not releasing them to Steam and just having it on their EA Origins site. So if you were a PC gamer, you had to go there rather than playing it on Steam, which you would have ultimately preferred to do, I would have thought. So Sims 4, Titanfall 2, A Way Out, Dead Space 3 are all coming to Steam, and EA as well have committed to new releases coming to Steam as well, presumably at launch, although that was slightly unclear. And as well that 7 new games are coming to Switch, including Burnout Paradise. They've not mentioned the other games that are coming to Switch as well, but this is kind of 2 U-turns here for EA. 1 coming back to Steam, and 2 bringing their games to Switch, which they'd previously said they didn't really have an interest in, and they didn't think that their fans would have an interest in, which was nonsense at the time, and I think they have now realised that. Yeah. So it's great that they're doing these things. Would you play Burnout Paradise on Switch, do you think, Liz?
Absolutely would, yeah. I can't think of many games that don't feel like a natural, or at least a good fit for the Switch, and certainly racing games, something that you can drop in and out of like that. Particularly with Burnout, the fact that the visual fidelity doesn't matter all that much, so you can take a bit of a hit on the graphics.
Because you're driving past it so fast, is that what you're trying to say?
Basically, you're driving so fast that everything's a fucking blur anyway, so it might as well be on a small screen, you know? I think, like, to talk about EA's U-turns, particularly the Switch one, that whole statement back then felt completely daft, that they thought that there wasn't an audience there. The Switch is selling like hotcakes. I mean, it's nigh impossible to get right now.
Yeah, particularly back then, that was crazy. I really don't know why they said that at all. It was a nonsense, and they have subsequently U-turned on that as well. So I think that they've realised that was completely daft. After that, they then went on to highlight some of their EA Originals studios. First up, and probably most famous, was Hazelight, and this is Joseph Fares's studio. If you don't know who Joseph Fares is, do a quick Google search and you'll find out how crazy this man is. But he and his studio were responsible for Brothers, A Tale of Two Sons, and A Way Out, which we played last year, Lewis, yeah?
I think last year. The years are all running together now. But
yeah, it's difficult to keep up. 2020 is just a weird one.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we played that before as well, and this is again a co-op game that he's announcing called It Takes Two, which seems to be an action-adventure game, or that's how he described it. And he talked a lot about kind of marrying mechanics and story together. It looks really interesting, I've got to say. It was about the experiences of a young girl whose parents are going through a divorce, and she creates like these two dolls, effectively, one out of clay and one out of wood, was it?
I think so, something like that, yeah.
And they were supposed to embody her emotions going through this difficult time, which is a really interesting concept. The problem is that I have found anyway that Joseph Fares's games in concept have all sounded excellent, but in execution have maybe missed the mark by quite a bit. But I'm really rooting for the guy because I do actually like him as a person. He's a maniac, but I do quite like him, and I really hope that pays off for him. It's coming in 2021. Next up was Zoink Games. This is the studio responsible for Fae, and they announced a game called Lost in Random. This was described as a gothic fairy tale, and its art style was very much in line with that, very Tim Burton-y. You play in the kingdom of random, and your companion is a little dice person, and it's all to do with kind of accepting the chaos of the universe and not being fully in control of your decisions and letting this dice effectively determine your decisions. Is that kind of what you were getting from it as well?
I think so, yeah. I mean, the pitch for that game was a little bit strange, but like you said, like visually really interesting, and I think one to keep an eye on, because if you're looking for that interesting puzzle platformer or like action adventure kind of blend, it looks like it's got something. I think it's a really shit name for a video game, though, I've got to say.
I have to agree. I do not think that's a very good name for a video game. Next up after that was Final Strike Games, and they were showing off Rocket Arena. This was actually announced back in May and has actually already had a closed beta. It's a 3v3 arena multiplayer where you have rocket launchers only, and instead of killing your enemy, you kind of knock them off the stage, Smash style, but it's in 3D. It's not like a 2D plane, it's like a full 3D island that you're working on. Again, they emphasised that this would be crossplay from the get-go. I think in general this looks like quite a cool game. I'm just not sure that it's very much for me.
No, I would totally go along with that. It wasn't doing anything much for me. I can see exactly what they're going for and what they think their audience is. It will definitely fit into that kind of battle royale sphere, particularly if you're a Fortnite player or whatever. I can absolutely see where the interest would be. But for me, yeah, even the rockets didn't look as fun as rockets in other games, which is kind of a sad thing given that's the basic principle of it. But yeah,
I've got to say it's a free-to-play game, so I would be very up for giving it a go. I like it in concept, but in practice it's probably not something that I'm going to stick with, unfortunately. But it is coming out July the 14th, so we don't have very long to wait. Next up was Star Wars Squadrons, and we got to see some gameplay. And Lewis, I know for a fact that I'm never going to play this game. It's not a game for me. I'm not into dogfighting games at all. I'm not into flying simulators or anything like that. But I honestly think that the gameplay for this game looks absolutely great.
Totally agree with that. I think it looks very, very impressive. I'm maybe slightly more minded to play it than you seem to be, because I used to really enjoy the space levels in the original Battlefront 2 back in the PS2 era. And so something about this just like triggered my nostalgia, and I really like that the kind of visuals are set within the cockpit. You have to actually use the Star Wars gizmos to understand how your ship is flying and what you need to do to correct or whatever. So something about it just feels very like lovingly put together, and I think Star Wars fans, particularly those ones who have been dying for a fucking game like this for so long, it looks to me like it's going to tick the right boxes.
And that is coming out on October the 2nd. Next up was Madden 21 and FIFA 21, and I'm not going to spend any time on this at all. If you want to play Madden or you want to play FIFA, you probably know more about Madden and FIFA than me, and they very much look like Madden and FIFA games. I'm sure you will love them. Then next up, they started talking a little bit about the next gen, and we got to see a couple of kind of flashes of interesting things here. They were talking about BioWare, and they showed what, like a sort of living tree, would you say, Lewis? I don't really know how to describe it. Glowing red tree.
Yeah, just a sort of strange, eerie tree environment, basically.
Yeah, which a lot of people are speculating could be from the new Dragon Age game, which is really cool if it is, but there's been no mention of Dragon Age at all in this or otherwise for a very, very long period of time. And the second thing that we got to see was from Motive, which looked like very, very early alpha footage of a game, which is very unusual to see in any capacity, let alone in a sort of showcase like this of a next-gen game as well, which looked a bit sort of, I'm not even sure how to describe it, but it looked cool. I was getting good vibes from it, I've got to say.
My first thought when I saw that was that I think that could be an early Star Wars project, because it seemed like one of the sort of bits it showed, there was someone kind of moving something with what looked like telekinetic powers, like they weren't right up against the object. And then also the sort of gun stroke sword looking thing that they were carrying in another point. It looked a bit like Cloud's Buster Sword, and I kind of wonder if that's going to end up being a lightsaber. I mean, nothing to go on for that, but I've just my little tip.
Yeah, to be clear, this is very, very, very early
it's
looking
like
footage. If
plain
you've not seen
polygons,
it,
basically.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So if it does end up being a Star Wars game, one, I would be very pleased, and two, that is an amazing take from you if it's true. And finally, the kind of big announcement to end on was that there was going to be a new Skate 4, which a lot of people, not me, but a lot of people were very, very excited about. I mean, it's awesome though. I mean, I like it when studios like this and publishers like EA, who are kind of known for being a bit of dickish, let's be honest, are listening to their fans and listening to what their fans want. And this has been long asked for by a certain community of gamers, you know what I mean? And was a absolutely beloved series kind of when the Tony Hawk games sort of died a death and Skate rose and really took over the skating game scene, I suppose, didn't it?
Essentially, yeah. And it does feel like, yeah, with the announcement that Tony Hawk's is getting remastered, something about this scene is coming back. I just can totally see in the online multiplayer content creator world that those types of games are going to be so big. Yeah, like you say, if you're a fan of Skate in the past, I think you've probably been clamouring for this amazing stuff.
Yeah, and just one thing to end on, there was no mention at all of Anthem. Nothing at all.
No.
Which I think is very, very, very telling indeed. Alright, news item number 2. We've got some pretty juicy Batman leaks loose. This concerns WB Montreal, who made Arkham Origins, and Rocksteady, who made basically all the other Arkham games, the original trilogy. And the fact that a bunch of domains, namely Suicide Squad game and Gotham Knights game, have been registered to a company linked to WB Interactive. Then after that, Eurogamer published an article called Yes, Batman Arkham developers Rocksteady is making a Suicide Squad game, lending the rumour significant credence, we will say. So it very much seems as though Rocksteady will be making a Suicide Squad game and WB Montreal will be making the Gotham Knights game. The Gotham Knights game is the one that was heavily linked to the Court of Owls comic book run, regarded as one of the best Batman runs in a very, very, very long time. Eurogamer also said that both projects would be teased at the upcoming DC fandom event on August the 22nd, although we are likely to see more of the Gotham Knights game than the Suicide Squad game, which is a little bit surprising considering Rocksteady have been so quiet for so long, you know. And both games are being developed for next gen. So Lewis, as the resident PlayersToo Batman fan, what were your thoughts on this?
Interesting. I've got to say, like, the Gotham Knights game, the fact that we've kind of had that rumoured and little hints about what that is for a long time, I'm pretty comfortable with what that's going to be, and if it's an interesting departure from the Arkham games, but still within that family of what that series is doing, I'm excited for that. I'll say that. I didn't play Arkham Origins. It was the only one of that original 4 games that I didn't get to, but I played all the Rocksteady ones and really enjoyed them. Suicide Squad, I'm a bit less interested in, if I'm totally honest, and that's just partly my preference. Like, I just don't know much about a lot of those characters, don't care about that as a kind of idea too much, but it just immediately made me think of the Avengers game and this kind of like squad-based superhero thing.
This is immediately what I was thinking of as well.
Yeah, I mean, I trust them because, as I say, like, those 3 Arkham games, certainly the first 2, I thought were excellent.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Rocksteady have made a bad game, so...
No, and so if they can bring some of that and introduce new characters, or, you know, or very iconic characters in certain cases, bring them into a video game, it'll be interesting to play as the villains if there is an element of attacking the Justice League. Like, if Superman becomes the final boss of a game, that would be really interesting.
It seems to be called Suicide Squad, and then the tagline seems to be Kill the Justice League.
Yeah.
Which actually ties into the rumours that Rocksteady were making a Superman game, because if the Justice League is involved in this, then Superman will be involved in this, so it's kind of all suddenly making sense, you know? The only thing I was thinking was, do you wish Rocksteady were making the Batman game and not the Suicide Squad game?
Ooh, tough question. I mean, I guess yes, overall.
Not that WB Montreal are a bad studio at all, by the way. They're very capable, but it's just Rocksteady have such a track record there.
Yeah,
you know?
That's the point, basically, that I wouldn't want to say, because I haven't played Arkham Origins, I wouldn't want to say that they couldn't approach that game and do it well, because I'm sure they can. But I know that Rocksteady can do it well, so yeah, maybe. But that I like to see innovation. If Rocksteady can do something interesting with a Suicide Squad game, then cool, like, let's see it. We all thought Batman games were pretty crap before they brought out Arkham Asylum, and so yeah, like, let's see what they can do with another IP, you know. Definitely.
Well, we will find out on August the 22nd, Bliss. It's very
Hopefully,
exciting.
Yep.
Batman game, finally. Alright, news item number 3, and this an absolute shocker. Microsoft are shutting down Mixer and transitioning their community to Facebook Gaming. Now, this came as a total shock to me, so I cannot imagine the surprise of the streaming community. This is quite a long one, but Microsoft have made this statement over on the Mixer blog.
From the beginning, Mixer has been about creating the most engaging and interactive live streaming experience. We set out to help streamers build great communities based on deep engagement with their audience. You all have been amazing throughout this journey. The Mixer community has focused on creating welcoming and inclusive communities, and you should be proud of what you've accomplished together. Ultimately, the success of partners and streamers on Mixer is dependent on our ability to scale the platform for them as quickly and broadly as possible. It became clear that the time needed to grow our own live streaming community to scale was out of measure with the vision and experiences that Microsoft and Xbox want to deliver for gamers now, so we've decided to close the operations side of Mixer and help the community transition to a new platform. To better serve our community's needs, we're teaming up with Facebook to enable the Mixer community to transition to Facebook Gaming. This is a key part of a broader effort that Xbox and Facebook Gaming are embarking on, bringing new experiences and opportunities to the entire world of gaming. The Facebook Gaming team and creators will help expand the vision that Mixer has always held around community and building a platform that is inclusive and supportive of each other. For Mixer's streamers, this opens up the opportunity to reach the vast audience of one of the world's fastest growing streaming platforms. Every month, more than 700 million people play a game, watch a gaming video, or interact in a gaming group on Facebook. For Facebook Gaming's creators, this brings the ability to partner closely with the Xbox ecosystem, including future opportunities around Xbox Game Pass, Project xCloud, and more.
Absolutely stunning. I cannot believe that this is happening, particularly the transition to Facebook Gaming. It's not even that they're just stopping this, it's that they're then moving their community on to a platform outside of Microsoft. This is just remarkable. And very, very surprising, because I always felt that Mixer were doing really good things in the streaming community. I know that it wasn't as big as a lot of the other streaming platforms, but I always felt as if they were doing good and new and interesting stuff in the streaming space. It was very popular among people that used it. I know it was very popular among people that had Xboxes, obviously, as well, because it was very, very easy to get your Xbox hooked up to it as well. It's just remarkable. It's crazy. What are your thoughts on this?
Much the same, to be honest. Like, I don't follow the streaming world all that closely, but obviously Mixer had been positioning itself as a fairly serious contender to what Twitch and what YouTube had to kind of become. Facebook Gaming felt like a bit of a further away element of all of that to a certain extent, but overall, I can see what it's about, and having read through that statement and see that essentially Xbox is aligning with Facebook, it sounds like what this is basically about.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely.
Which is kind of stunning. We spoke before about Xbox and Samsung partnering up and what that might mean for putting an Xbox app directly onto TVs. The idea that Xbox and Facebook, which is ubiquitous essentially, certainly in the Western world, that those two things are going to be connected to that degree, it's crazy. It could be a really huge thing. A lot of people have a lot of issues with Facebook as well, though, and that, that kind of
certainly do. I know that I do.
I certainly do as well. And so there will be a conflict for some streamers, I'm sure, around this, and they might decide that Mixer or Facebook Gaming isn't the platform for them anymore.
Well, speaking of streamers having to make a decision, of course, a big part of Mixer, or what really put Mixer on the map, certainly in my mind, was that they began offering huge contracts to major streamers. Most notably were Ninja and Shroud. And according to a gentleman on Twitter by the name of Slasher, this has subsequently been reported also by VGC, that Ninja, who was on 30 million for his contract with Mixer, and Shroud, who was on 10 million for his contract with Mixer, were both offered double to stay at Facebook Gaming, and both turned it down. I'm not entirely sure how verified that is. I don't think either of them have made statements, but I think that says a lot. If you offer someone $60 million to come and stream on your streaming service and they turn it down, I think that says a lot, personally.
Yep, a big statement. I wonder whether that's about it being Facebook particularly, or if maybe they just think being free agents, they can take the money, they can go back to Twitch, for instance, and just do their own thing again, Oh,
I'm sure. I mean, if Ninja and Shroud returned to Twitch, I'm sure that they would be 1 and 2 in the streaming numbers within a week.
Yeah,
or not even a week, within days, hours maybe. I also found an interesting thing about the numbers with regards to streaming 2019 versus 2020. Now, I think a lot of these numbers for 2020 are inflated because of the coronavirus. A lot of people are staying home, a lot of people are watching more streams. This is well understood. However, it seems that the year-on-year growth for Facebook Gaming is 238%, which is an absolutely colossal number. but the year-on-year growth 2019 to 2020 for Mixer was 0.2%.
Oh, wow. Well, maybe that
which
explains
is very,
it.
very,
Yeah.
very small.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's part of it. Maybe Mixer just simply isn't growing as fast as Xbox need it to be a viable part of their business. And I don't know if Facebook have come along and basically made them an offer that they can't refuse. That from streamelements.com, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes if anyone is interested in looking up the numbers. All right, news item number 4. Lewis, there's been a new Crash Bandicoot game announced. It is called Crash Bandicoot 4. It's about time. And that is true because there hasn't been a numbered Crash Bandicoot game since 1998, which is absolutely wild.
Yeah.
This actually leaked ahead of time from a Taiwanese ratings board website, which actually included the cover art. So when this was announced, unfortunately, it came as a surprise to no one. But it is a direct sequel to Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped, which was the last numbered game that came out in 1998. Also, interestingly, I think that is Activision basically saying that, see all that Vivendi shit that came after 3, after PlayStation sold it, forget all that happened, we are rewriting the canon, which I am fully on board with, by the way.
Yeah.
The game is going to be developed by Toys for Bob, who worked on the recent Spyro Trilogy remakes and the Crash Trilogy remakes, both of which were pretty well received, I think. And honestly, I thought the trailer looked great. Thought it looked absolutely great. It's coming on October the 2nd as well. What did you think?
It does look great. I mean, it just looks exactly like Crash, but in 2020, polished
exactly,
up.
Crash in 2020. That's all we need.
Yeah,
that is all we need.
It hasn't veered too much by the look of it from what the original games are great for, you know, why people like them. Even the switches between running towards camera, running away from camera, and the 2D side-scrolling kind of sections.
Yeah, I love that they were showing like the chase levels this time, instead of it being like a big boulder, it was like a big dinosaur this time.
Absolutely.
I was like, yes, give it to me.
And you can the fact that it's then also got time jumping elements or whatever, like that felt to me so close to what Crash Bandicoot 3 was, whether you had the kind of little warp rooms. It just feels...
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, I think Toys for Bob have basically said that the reason that they wanted to follow it as a proper numbered sequel was that all of the excitement is around that original trilogy. So that's where they're going to follow on from, and that makes total sense. And I can see how people who would, you know, have been clamouring for this game for so long would be so thrilled with this trailer.
Too bloody right, Lewis. I must admit, I've not been excited for a Crash Bandicoot game that isn't one of the remakes in a very, very long time, and I thought that looked great. Perhaps a bit of a surprise is that the game wasn't announced for PC or Switch. However, both the Crash and Spyro Trilogy remakes eventually made their way to PC and to Switch about a year later, basically. I would imagine that this would follow suit as well, because the Switch in particular seems like a great place to have this game, you know?
Totally. I would have thought you would want that on the Switch before Christmas, to be honest.
Ideally, but I think it might be Christmas next year.
Yeah.
All right, finishing off as we always do with a couple of shout-outs. Shout out number 1, SpongeBob SquarePants, Lewis. The Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated has come out. Now that is a mouthful. This is a remake of the cult classic, I will say. We don't get a lot of cult classics in video games, but I definitely think that this qualifies. And it's currently out now on all platforms. The game is currently sitting between a 66 and a 69 on Metacritic. This game was never going to score very highly at all, but what I would like to point out is that on PC, on PS4 and on Xbox, the user reviews for this are all in the 9s. So if you liked this game back in the day, you're going to like this remake without a shadow of a doubt. Alright then, shout out number 2. Cyberpunk 2077 has been delayed again. The game was originally supposed to come out on April the 16th, then it was moved to September the 17th, and now we're being told that it will be November the 19th. CD Projekt Red have made this statement on Twitter.
We've decided to move the launch of Cyberpunk 2077 from September 17th to November 19th. Those of you who are familiar with the way we make games know that we won't ship something which is not ready. Ready when it's done is not just a phrase we say because it sounds right, it's something we live by even when we know we'll take the heat for it. At the same time, we're fully aware that making such a decision costs us your trust and trading trust for additional time is one of the hardest decisions a game developer can make. And despite we think it's the right decision for the game, we'd still like to apologise for making you wait longer. Our intention is to make Cyberpunk 2077 something that will stay with you for years to come. In the end, we hope you understand why we did what we did. At the time we were writing these words, Cyberpunk 2077 is finished both content and gameplay-wise. The quests, the cutscenes, the skills and items, all the adventures Night City has to offer, it's all there. But with such an abundance of content and complex systems interweaving with each other, we need to properly go through everything, balance game mechanics, and fix a lot of bugs. A huge world means a huge number of things to iron out, and we will spend the additional time doing exactly that. This week, journalists from all over the world are starting to independently play the game. We're eager and quite stressed to hear their opinions, as well as see your reactions when they publish their previews right after we air Night City Wire on the 25th of June. We hope this will satisfy some of your hunger for the game as we work to polish it for the November launch.
My response to this is take your time, CD Projekt Red. Take your time, make this game as good as it possibly can be at launch. I'm very, very excited to play it. If it takes you another couple of months, so be it. I don't think that anyone at that time of the year will be struggling to find something to play, I will say. So if we need to wait another couple of months for this, so be it, particularly if it means that you're ironing out a lot of those bugs and a lot of those things that can really break the experience, you know. What I do hope is that moving this from September the 17th to November the 19th means that this will alleviate some of that crunch time, because they have admitted that they are basically in crunch just now, and that this isn't extending that crunch time.
Yeah, and particularly the fact that it's more about catching bugs and stuff like that rather than still building the game will surely mean that it's also surely connected to the next gen launch. It's got to be, in my mind.
Alright, shout out number 3. There was a Pokemon Presents this week as well. This is basically a Pokemon Direct. I don't really know why they're calling it a different thing. But just to run down some of the announcements that were made in that, the first of which was a glorious little thing called Pokemon Smile, which basically gamifies brushing your teeth for children, which I thought was an absolutely sensationally good idea. It sounds dumb as hell, but for a kid, I actually think that's great. And if you're a parent that's trying to make your kid brush your teeth for the appropriate amount of time, then if you can turn it into a game where you get to capture like a Pikachu or something like that, go for it. I like it.
Absolutely.
Next up was Pokemon Cafe and Mix, which is a Pokemon puzzle game for Switch and phones, which sees you running a Pokemon cafe, and then there's an odd sort of puzzle mechanic where you swirl round and collect different types of... It's one of the maddest things I've ever seen, this mechanic, and honestly, it looks pretty bad. But if you're interested in running a Pokemon cafe, you go and look it up. The next one is definitely the big one, New Pokemon Snap. And although it is a new Pokemon Snap game, the game is also called New Pokemon Snap, just to confuse everyone even further. The original Pokemon Snap came out on the N64 over 20 years ago, unbelievably, and it was a massive, massive fan favourite. It basically saw you taking photos of Pokemon rather than capturing them. That was the main mechanic around it. And a lot of people were extremely, extremely excited about it. Twitter basically blew up for a day. Despite being a Pokemon fan, I never played the original Pokemon Snap, and honestly I have very little interest in playing this one as well, but it's super awesome that it's there for fans of the original. Then after that, they just kind of went into some Pokemon Go stuff, mainly that their Pokemon Go Fest 2020 will be a completely online event this year, of course, because of the coronavirus, and will be accessible for everyone, which is super awesome, and also that they are bringing Mega Evolutions to Pokemon Go. But something a lot more interesting to me, anyway, was that they teased at the end of this that they would be making another announcement about a, quotes, big project on the 24th. Now, ladies and gentlemen, by the time you hear this, the 24th will have passed, but as we record this, it is the 23rd, and I do not know what this is about. Rumour has it just now that this will be a Pokemon Let's Go 2, or a Pokemon Let's Go Johto, e.g. a Pokemon Let's Go for the Gold and Silver games, effectively, which I hope it isn't, because the other rumour would be a remake of Diamond and Pearl, which is the 4th generation games, which would be totally awesome, and I would love it to be that instead. However, I'm not entirely sure how likely that is.
Nah, it doesn't feel likely to me, to be honest.
Do you think it's too close to the launch of Sword and Shield? Is that what you're...
Pretty much, yeah. I don't think they're going to want to complicate things by introducing remakes now, but we'll see.
One can dream less. One can dream. Alright, and shout out number 4. Sony has announced that they will support publishers who want to offer PS5 upgrades of PS4 titles. FIFA, Madden, Cyberpunk, Marvel's Avengers very recently as well have already confirmed that they will be doing this, and this is basically PlayStation's smart delivery, although they're not calling it that. It's basically the same as what Xbox are doing with smart delivery. So 2 points to this, Lewis. One, does this take a bit of the sting out of the tail for the Xbox Series X pitch that really pushed that smart delivery, and now PlayStation are basically saying, well, we're doing exactly the same thing? And conversely, why aren't PlayStation shouting this from the rooftops in the same way that Xbox are, you know?
Good questions. I don't really have an answer to your second one particularly, because it does seem strange that they haven't met that clamour from Xbox around it. However, it might simply be that Xbox have done that and they don't want to hit the same marketing beats. I also, as we've talked about quite a lot before, I'm not sure that there is actually a huge demand in reality for previous gen games on future consoles. So maybe PlayStation are just thinking, we'll let our PS5 generation do the talking. We don't need to harp on about bringing previous games forward. But I never had much doubt in my mind, to be honest, that Sony were going to do something akin to smart delivery.
No, me neither, to be completely honest with you. It's just good to have it confirmed,
exactly,
but I just thought they would have confirmed it much louder.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I'm not really sure why this wasn't like part of a bigger announcement or more of a statement or part of the showcase from last week.
Yeah, so basically this came out from a Japanese gaming website called GameSpark, and it was a PlayStation spokesman that mentioned that it wasn't part of any big press conference or anything, it was weirdly PlayStation, I've got to say. What will be interesting is to see if PlayStation do this with their own titles, because there has been no mention of a PS5 upgrade for The Last of Us Part 2 or Ghost of Tsushima or any of the previous titles, and we know that that's something that Xbox are doing. Alright, Liz, I think it is time for a beer, and then we will be back with Topic of the Week. And we are back with Topic of the Week. Topic of the Week this week is 10 out of 10 games, and what that score means, or means to us anyway, Liz.
It is indeed, yeah. So this obviously just kind of responding to a lot of the review scores that have been given to The Last of Us Part 2 over the last few weeks. But generally speaking, I mean, we've talked a bit about game reviews more broadly in the past, and it's something that we talk about endlessly off air. I think we should admit like what a game should be scored and how we view all that. Okay, I wanted to dive in like 10 out of 10. I guess we could rope in like a 5-star review or whatever to that. What does that score mean to you? If a game is given a 10, what do you think that means?
Well, I think I'm going to start by saying what it doesn't mean. And what it doesn't mean is that the game is perfect. It does not mean that this is a perfect video game. And what I will also say is that a game that is 10 out of 10 today will not necessarily be a 10 out of 10 game tomorrow. I think that because video games are so inherently linked to technology and advancements of that nature, it doesn't necessarily make games from the past worse, but it changes our perspective of what video games can be and what video games can do in a way that I don't think is anywhere near as prevalent over the course of our lifetimes anyway. And things like television and things like movies. So to me, I think that scores almost degenerate over time, which I don't really know if that's controversial or not, but that's kind of how I feel about it. But to me, a 10 out of 10 game is, at the time, a game that is incredibly innovative, that is executed to an incredibly high standard, that is effectively for the moment one of the pinnacles of the art form, and it will not only go down in history as one of the best games ever made, but will probably go down in history as one of the most important games ever made. And I think that that's an important distinction to make. It's not just about it being the best. For me, it also has to do something more than that. Like, there's a lot of games that are out there that I can say, this is an absolutely astonishing game, but are we going to build on it? Are we going to do something more? It almost has to transcend itself for me to be a 10. And that is why very few games get a 10 out of 10 for me, Lewis.
Well, there's quite a lot in what you've just said that I would love to dive into.
Go for it.
So yeah, well, just starting off on that then, because you said earlier on that the gameplay of The Last of Us Part 2 doesn't, and I'll say right now, this isn't a conversation just about The Last of Us Part 2, but I want to pick you up specifically on something there. You said earlier the gameplay doesn't innovate massively on the original, but it has added some other kind of nice touches. Does that mean then, because you talked there about how a 10 out of 10 game has to innovate and change something and bring something new, does that mean The Last of Us Part 2 can't be a 10 in your eyes?
Absolutely not.
Yeah, because I don't think that's what you're saying.
You're only focusing on one part of it as well. Like, you're only focusing on, oh, well, the mechanics of that game were fairly iterative on what came before, therefore that game can't be a 10 out of 10. No, not at all. Because the way in that game tells a story, or the type of story that it told, or the way that the actors related, the way that the writing was done was far more like a movie than maybe any other video game that has come before it. And there was a real connection of, and I spoke about this when I played The Last of Us Part 1 in January, is that there's a real sense of connection and human moments in that game that I think is difficult to accomplish in cinema, let alone in video games, because inherently video games are animated characters on screen, but a lot of the time, particularly between Joel and Ellie in The Last of Us Part 1, is you feel a real human connection in tiny little moments. You feel that these are two human beings talking to one another. They're not two characters talking to one another. And I'm not entirely sure that I've ever seen that done in a video game before. So in terms of writing, that game is almost the pinnacle, is almost what others aspire to be. just because it didn't particularly innovate in its mechanics doesn't mean that it isn't a 10 out of 10 for me as well. Like, none of this is very fixed rules as well. Like, we can move this all over the place. This is also just my opinion, you know what I mean? And none of this matters. People could have a completely different opinion of what a 10 out of 10 is.
Totally.
But for me, those mechanics, although they were iterative, and we'd seen them before, we'd seen the stealth, we'd seen the type of shooting mechanics, we'd seen the weaponry, despite being iterative, was still executed exceptionally well into an incredibly high standard.
I totally agree with everything that you said there, to be honest. Like, I guess I just wanted to pick up on that, the idea that a game that doesn't drastically change or improve its gameplay can also be considered a kind of top game.
Yeah. So, for example, another good example of this for me, so a game that I would have considered a 10 out of 10 in kind of recent years is Breath of the Wild. Mm-hmm. But Breath of the Wild, in terms of its combat mechanics, is not innovative at all. And in actual fact, some people found it really quite annoying. But in terms of an open world game and how freeing and how truly open an open world can feel, mm-hmm. I don't think I've felt a sense of freedom in a video game ever.
No.
Like I felt in Breath of the Wild. And that for me was something truly astonishing. And in terms of going beyond itself, being more than the sum of its parts, effectively, like, we now see Breath of the Wild influence so many other open world games, even in terms of art style and things like that, and going for that feel of Breath of the Wild, mm-hmm. even if it isn't the same in terms of open world, but people continuing to bring that sense of openness into their open worlds, you know?
Yeah, and that sense of exploration and stuff. I think that's exactly, yeah. That's absolutely the key to it. Like, I really like, I guess, like, to frame where I stand on all of this, I'm not maybe anywhere near as fixed on what I think a 10 is, or that I don't think that they necessarily have to be given quite so rarely. And I actually want to ask you a question specifically around that in a minute. But for me, like, I would give a 10 to any game that moves me in a particular way or that feels innovative in itself. So like a game like Return of the Obra Dinn, I would say, I don't know if I'm definitively right now giving it a 10, but I would say it's absolutely open to that because it was so different to anything else I'd played for quite a long time. And things like the art style and the gameplay mechanics and the story, they were just all really interesting and quite different to a lot of other things. So I'm not as, don't get me wrong, like I think that your way of thinking about it is really interesting and quite strong, that you would say basically a 10 out of 10 game has to effectively fucking move the industry in certain ways.
It has to be a literal game changer, Liz.
Yeah.
Pun fully intended, as always.
As always. I'm so used to it now, I just glide past it. I think that's an interesting perspective, because one of the questions I'd kind of thought about before we started here was, do you think giving a 10 should be rare? And does making a 10 out of 10 game, turning that into a rarity, does that create the kind of backlash that we've seen towards The Last of Us Part 2? Do you think if we saw more games as 10s or that kind of a level of a game, took the little things that they do, like you say, like the exploration in Breath of the Wild, pretty much elevates that game, because it's not a great story particularly either, you know, like one element of a game can make it that level. And I wonder if we gave that accolade out to more games, if we would kind of start to see more interesting things bubble up, you know. Just to finish on that and let you answer, I'm so struck by how many of the types of games that your description would fit are big AAA cinematic games like God of War, like the original Last of Us, like Red Dead Redemption Part 2. You know, they are big cinematic, story-driven, weighty games. And I wonder, like, can a game that isn't like that fit into your description of a 10?
Well, I suppose in my description of a 10, which again is one man's opinion here as well, I want to stress. But yeah, in my definition of a 10, or my very loose definition of a 10 that I just went into there, yes, it would be very difficult for an indie game, I would say, to innovate on that level, to then become a 10 out of a 10. Because if I'm saying that my definition of a 10 is something that goes beyond the game itself and influences gaming and gamers beyond their experience of the game, you know, then yeah, I think that it would be incredibly difficult for an indie game to do that. But some indie games that I would consider in that echelon, I'm not necessarily even giving them a 10 out of 10, because I actually, in principle, don't actually like giving games scores at all.
Yeah.
But some games that I would consider that level of an experience is Hollow Knight and Celeste are two that immediately jump to mind for me.
Definitely, yeah.
Both of which are just astonishingly good games, both in terms of execution and in terms of what they are doing and how they are innovating on other things. Like Celeste is taking what is effectively the simple platforming structure and laid across it this incredibly beautiful moving story, which I've never really seen done in a platformer before. And then similarly, Hollow Knight is telling a story through, I think I've used this expression before to explain how Hollow Knight gets across his plot, is very much show don't tell. and I've never really seen that done so incredibly well in a video game before. And again, that's sort of draped across a very classic Metroidvania. Those games are incredibly innovative to me anyway, or when I see them, they are incredibly innovative. But on top of that, they can't just be innovative, they have to be innovative and be executed exceptionally well, and both of those are.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? But they are very rare cases, and that just comes with the territory of being an indie game, unfortunately. In terms of giving out more 10s, in my system, quotes my system as if my system is a system at all, right? In my head, I wouldn't be giving out a lot of 10s because for me, a 10 is something huge. Like, it's a really big deal to be given a 10. It's saying something a lot about your game, and particularly for a lot of these big gaming outlets like your Game Informers, Kotaku's, whatever, people that score games, people that contribute to Metacritic, for something to be given a 10 holds such incredible weight. To give out more 10s would inherently devalue that, which I suppose is what you're getting at. Like, are we giving too much power to the 10, I suppose? And I think that has a lot to do, unfortunately, with the people reading those reviews rather than the people writing those reviews. Because I think that when gamers naively think that, oh, well, that's a game's a 10 out of 10, so that's a near-perfect video game, therefore I'm going to love this and this is going to be one of my favourite games of all time. And then when they buy that game, and then when they play that game, and then when it's not, this is when backlashes happen, isn't it? I think that there has to be some understanding that when some outlet gives a game a 10 out of a 10, no gaming outlet in the world is calling that game a perfect game. Or if they are, they're stupid for doing that, because no game is a perfect game. Yeah. We can always improve, and I truly believe that. And I think that understanding is important because, again, it leads to backlashes like what The Last of Us Part 2. So, I mean, I know that that's coming from different angles.
Yeah, definitely.
Many different angles of criticism. However, that is definitely one part of it, is that when the review scores came out for that game, they were through the roof, partly as expected. And in response to that, when people then played the game and they didn't like it as much as the first one even, or they didn't like it as much as other games that they'd played, maybe they'd played some of the other big, heavily lauded games over the last few years, your God of Wars, your Red Dead Redemption 2s or whatever, they didn't even rate it as highly as that, then they're beginning to question, well, I wouldn't give this game a 10, therefore this outlet is wrong.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily what we're saying, and I hope that even through our conversation, in my definition of a 10, which I've kind of thought about in terms of, like, if I were doing this, what would I think that a 10 was? But I don't think a lot of people have done that process. And even through the process of us speaking about this, it's entirely subjective. Like, what you're saying a 10 is and what I'm saying a 10 is are two completely different things. No one's wrong because it's completely subjective. It is utterly nonsense to say, well, I wouldn't have given this game a 10, so you're wrong for giving it a 10. No, they're not. No one's wrong for giving it a 10. Lewis, if you want to give Oberdin a 10 out of 10, that's absolutely fine. If that's one of your favourite games ever and you think that that is worthy of the highest accolades in video gaming, which is kind of what we're saying a 10 out of 10 is, great. Like, who's to argue with you? Because it's totally subjective. Like, you can have debates around these things, but ultimately it's someone's opinion.
Yeah,
and that's that.
I think that's the key to it all. And just to mention, even if an outlet like IGN gives a 10, it's still even just one person or maybe like one or two people's opinion within the organisation. It's not
exactly. It's not necessarily indicative of the whole organisation.
Exactly. So there'll absolutely be people at these outlets who feel the same as you do if you don't agree with them. But yeah, I think that's the thing around The Last of Us 2's review scores, and the fact that there seemed to be this open disbelief that it could possibly be a 10 from some quarters who, as you said, absolutely have like other motivating factors within this, but there was this kind of reaction like it couldn't possibly be a 10. And that, to me, as you were pointing out, like, game scoring overall is utterly subjective. It's nothing but subjective. So the notion that any game could or couldn't be a 10 is just nonsense. But I think this is like an interest. I mean, I could talk to you about this for ages, actually, because even just your opening statement had me kind of going, what about this though? What about this? But like this idea of people interrogating their own ideas of what game scoring is or what its purpose is or what the best games look like, because some people hate big cinematic games that your definition, or in large strokes my definition of what a 10 is, kind of encapsulates. A lot of people hate those types of games, so what would they think is a 10 wouldn't even come close to what we do. But if they can justify it, and if they can say why a game that's just, you know, if someone wants to say Overcooked is a perfect 10 because it's just so much fun, they've never had more fun playing a video game with their pal or whatever.
Maybe they had a huge connection with someone in their family over that game.
Totally.
Maybe that game just means so much more to them than on its surface, you know. And if someone wants to call that a 10 out of 10, then who the fuck am I to tell them no?
Well,
you know?
Exactly that. And I think, like, to go back to one of the things you said originally as well, like this idea that a 10 might degenerate over time, there's something really interesting there if you take that in parallel to other art forms where, yeah, like a film from the 30s, I don't think many people right now would say that's a 10 out of 10, but obviously
exactly.
But its impact and its influence means that it's so central to film culture or music culture or whatever, that it has to be remembered. So you do actually often see old films getting re-reviewed now because they've got a new, remaster on screen, and they'll often be given like a 5-star review. And to me, I'm like, what's even the purpose of this? Why do we need this? But it's saying something about the quality of that piece of work to the whole canon of cinema. And I think that in time, as gaming becomes an older medium, it's still extremely young when we think about it, but when this becomes an older medium, these games that we are now defining as 10s will not be seen as 10s 50 years from now, but they will be so important. Like, so many of the games that we're talking about now as 10s will have impact for at least the next decade, probably the next 2 decades. There's stuff that we've seen from back in the 80s which continues to be part of gaming, So the idea that a 10 is this resolute fixed thing, I think, as you put right at the start, is kind of absurd, basically. And that a 10,
of course
it's always decaying, but that doesn't devalue it, and nor does the fact that it is going to decay mean that we can't right now say this game is as close to perfection as we can kind of reasonably expect.
Absolutely. And I think that these outlets that are giving these 10 out of 10s, again, your IGNs, Game Informers, your Kotakus, Polygon, whoever your outlet of choice is, they are doing this to, or they should be doing this to, help fans decide what games they want to buy. And the reason why reviews are so much more important in video games than in movies or in music is because the investment cost to buy a video game versus someone's new album or a movie ticket is so much higher, and as well the time investment to get the payoff is so much higher again. So what I would actually like to see a lot more of is not reviews, oh, this is a 10 out of 10, this is a masterpiece, or this is a near perfect game or whatever, or oh, this is only an 8, it's great, but sort of reviews. I would really like to see reviews of, this is why we think you should buy this game, or you might be interested in this game because of these things you might not. Like, I would like to see much more reviews like that, which to me are much more consumer focused and a lot less publisher focused, because they don't just get to slap a bunch of 10 out of 10s across a poster. You know what I mean? That's really what I'd like to see. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think we would have to call it a day there. I'd like to remind everyone that you can find PlayersToo on all the social media. That's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com. That's PLAYERSTOO.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, it really, 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 really helps us out. I know that we say it every single week, but it does not get any less important on a week-by-week basis. It really, really helps us out, and if anyone could go and do that for us, it would be so helpful. We would be eternally grateful to you, and thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us already. You are an absolute legend to us. I'd like to remind everyone that our play-along game for this month is Volume. This is another Mike Bithell game, who done Thomas Was Alone, our previous play-along game. I've started it a little bit. I'm going to have to take a break from The Last of Us Part 2 to finish it, which is not something I particularly want to do, but nonetheless, I was enjoying it, so I'm more than happy to go back. Yeah,
I still need to continue my playthrough from years ago now, but I'm looking forward to it, but I don't want to take a Last of Us break either, I've got to admit.
But we must. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will see you next week.
Thanks.